Welcome back to Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobby Holmes. I had a great response to the return of the show, and thanks to all for your continued support even in my absence. I do also realize I went past my bi-weekly quota I gave myself, but there's a lot of research involved in this one. This week, I'm discussing a case suggested by a New Zealand listener, Lizzie Bourke. Lizzie wanted me to cover the supposed family annihilator, Mark Lundy. The reason I say supposed is because this case comes with so much controversy. I literally have no idea if he's guilty or not. Mark was convicted of the crimes, but claims his innocence to this day. I'm here to lay out all the facts and let you be the judge. Let's begin with some background on the Lundy family. Christine met Mark on a trip for Boys and Girl Guides when she was 17 and he was 20. In case you're like me and wondering, what is a girl guide? The description on Wikipedia states the main principle of guiding is to, quote, be true to yourself and develop your beliefs, to live by the guide law, and to take action for a better world, which honestly doesn't tell me much. But it also listed the fact that they are known for their biscuits, so I'm going to guess they are like Girl Scouts here in America. I am a sucker for Samoa cookies. Back to Mark and Christine. They dated for a while and tied the knot in 1983. One thing they shared was a love for wine. They both were members of a wine club, and that's where they were able to build friendships with others as a couple. Once married, Mark and Christine started a new business together. It was selling kitchen sinks and tapware. Mark ran the sales side of things, which meant he traveled frequently, and Christine managed the financial side of the business. The couple wanted children, but experienced many heartbroken years struggling to get pregnant. But luck was on their side, and Christine gave birth to a little girl they named Amber Grace on June 9th, 1993. Amber was an only child, and from what I can see in photos, she was adored and doted on by both her parents. Like her mom, Amber was a girl guide and attended weekly meetings. Along with being a girl guide, she also took dance classes after school. At the time of the crimes, Amber was just 7 years old. Let's go ahead and jump to the day of the murders and lay out the timeline of events. Tuesday, August 29th, 2000. At 8:30 a.m., Christine dropped Amber off at school. Then she met Mark at a local store where together they picked out a new lampshade for the spare bedroom. After deciding on a blue one, Christine drove back home and Mark drove to Petone for a work trip. He frequently conducted business in the city of Wellington, almost 2 hours away from their hometown in Palmerston North. He always stayed in the same hotel in Petone, which is a suburb of Wellington and a little more low-key area. I imagine it was cheaper to stay there as well. After school, Christine took Amber to her dance class and then drove her to the Girl Guides meeting. When they arrived, she discovered the meeting had been canceled. At 5:30 p.m., Christine dialed Mark on his cell phone to tell him the meeting was canceled, and then she handed the phone to Amber. She had a question for her dad. She politely asked if she could have McDonald's for dinner, and he said, yes, of course you can have McDonald's, one of her favorite treats. This phone call ended at 5:43 p.m. It was estimated that Christine and Amber ate their McDonald's meal around 6 p.m. At 6:56 p.m., Christine had another phone call with a girlfriend from her wine club. The friend stated the call was short and more like a question with an answer, not a lot of chit-chat after. At 8:28 p.m., Mark had a conversation with his business partner regarding their future vineyard from the landline phone at his hotel. The next morning, Mark awoke from his hotel and drove to a store where he bought batteries for his electric razor, grabbed some breakfast, and was ready for his day of business meetings. He tried to call Christine on both her cell phone and the landline, but he wasn't able to reach her. Christine's brother Glenn also ran a small business, and she helped him keep his finances in check. Christine promised to have his taxes prepped and ready for him that Wednesday. Glenn called Christine's cell and their landline, and he wasn't able to reach her either. But he decided he would just drop by the house. Glenn parked his car in the driveway and walked around to the back of the house. The Lundys typically entered their home through the sunroom. He noticed the door was not latched and hanging open. Glenn called out for Christine, but there was no answer. He walked inside, and nothing seemed abnormal until he peered back the hallway towards the bedrooms. He saw 7-year-old Amber lying face down on the ground in the doorway. Her legs and feet were inside of the master bedroom. Glenn could see her upper body from the hall, and there was blood pooled around her. He frantically picked up the phone to call emergency services, which is 111 in New Zealand. As instructed, he checked for a pulse, but there wasn't one. As Glenn looked up into the master bedroom, his heart stopped. He saw his sister. She was naked, lying on her back atop a blood-soaked bed. Police arrived quickly to the scene. Shortly after, a neighborhood friend of Christine's, named Karen, arrived at the home for their pre-planned morning walk. She saw police cars and was horrified to find out that Christine and Amber had been brutally murdered. Karen was distraught, but she was forced to keep her cool when at 9:28 a.m. Mark called the landline again. He was relieved that this time someone answered, but it wasn't Christine, it was Karen. When the phone rang, police instructed Karen to answer. She told Mark, "Sorry, Christina's busy, but I'll have to call you back later." I think this was a way to gauge Mark's reaction because the husband is always suspect number one. But I also find it kind of strange that police can legally keep this information from Mark. At this point, they have no idea if he's involved. Anyways, a couple of hours went by, but Mark still had not heard from Christine. He called a friend in the neighborhood and asked him to drive by the house and make sure everything was okay. About 10 minutes later, that friend called him back and was like, there's police parked outside of your house, and I heard on the radio that there's been a double murder in Palmerston North. Mark jumped in his car and rushed home, where the police broke the news that his wife and daughter had both been killed. Amber suffered 7 deep wounds to her head. The way she was positioned, face down with her legs inside of the master bedroom and her upper body in the hall, they thought it seemed as if she was attacked while fleeing the room. Similarly, Christine had 12 wounds to her head. Her wounds were more severe, one being 8 centimeters deep. She also had defensive wounds on her arms and hands. No murder weapon was found at the scene. Investigators were able to determine the weapon as a sharp-edged tool with a long handle. Unfortunately, the weapon was never discovered, but it was thought to be something like a tomahawk or a small axe. At the funeral, Mark seemed genuine with grief over the loss of his family. This case blew up in the media. The paparazzi were there documenting his every move. There were times he had to be held up by 2 men as if he was so out of sorts he couldn't even stand or walk. In the beginning, Mark was pretty much ruled out due to the fact he was out of town on business at the time. But when they looked into his phone records, they found something interesting. On the night of August 29th, after finishing his business call, Mark used his cell phone to call a local massage parlor at 11:30 p.m. Odd time for a massage. Well, this was the kind that does more than just massage. A sex worker came to his hotel room, and when she finished her services, she used Mark's cell phone to call herself a cab. He fully admitted to this and said he had done it only a few times before. This information was leaked to the media, and Mark went very quickly from being viewed as a grieving husband to, well, a suspect. Let's review evidence found at the crime scene. There was a broken latch on a window next to the sliding door in the sunroom. Strangely, it was broken from the inside, not outside. There were no fingerprints on the latch, but there was blood. Christine's. This was thought to be staged by the killer to make it look like a break-in. But if it were a break-in, there would be evidence of damage from the outside, not the inside. And unless they crawled out the window instead of just opening the door and walking out, there shouldn't be blood on the inside of the window latch. When Mark walked through the house with investigators, he announced Christine's wooden jewelry box was missing. This comment raised suspicion because there was actually a lot of things missing. Items had already been bagged and tagged into evidence. But Mark continued to comment on the jewelry box and said he was, quote, pleased it was missing, because that indicated it was a robbery gone wrong, even though there were other valuables that were left behind. For example, a laptop was in plain view and it was not taken. I think in the year 2000, that would have been a high-value item. If you remember, Christine was found naked. So either she slept naked and was already in bed, or her assailant took her clothes off to make it seem like a sexual assault had taken place. But there was no evidence pointing to a sexual assault on Christine or 7-year-old Amber. Investigators focused on the severity of the attack of this mother and daughter. They were beaten with the sharp object to the point that they were unrecognizable. Even though it was assumed to be Christine and Amber because it was their home, that had to be confirmed using dental records. As we discussed last week, robberies gone wrong don't usually go down like this. They will maybe shoot the victim and run for it. These murders were crimes of passion. It was looking more and more like Mark could indeed be responsible for murdering his wife and child. But why? What would be the motive? According to outsiders, they had a happy marriage. Happy marriage or not, they did have some debt, and money, or lack thereof, can cause a lot of stress in a marriage. The Lundys still owed $72,000 on their mortgage. They had over $12,000 in credit card debt, and their sink business was $100,000 in debt. And if you think that's a lot, here's the big one. Those 2 plots of land they purchased to someday start their own vineyard cost over $2 million. And their initial investors decided to pull out. The Lundys were getting deeper and deeper in debt by the day. Literally. Get this, the interest on this loan, because they had missed multiple payments, was $700 a day. A day. They accumulated $140,000 in penalty interest alone. The ultimate deadline for payment was August 30th. Coincidence that Christine and Amber were murdered the night prior? What is extra fishy is that Mark told police they were not having any financial issues. I mean, why lie? You know they're going to find out. Here's another bombshell. Just a few days prior to the murders, Christine's life insurance was upped from $200,000 to $500,000. And Christine was present for this meeting. If I knew my family was drowning in debt, and she does because she's in charge of the finances, and I'm sitting down with my husband and an insurance broker upping my life insurance, alarm bells would be ringing. So this potentially explains a motive for Christine, but what about Amber? Why would Mark kill his innocent 7-year-old daughter? As I stated earlier, the way her body was positioned made it seem like she was exiting the master bedroom. Maybe Amber was never part of the plan, but came to check on her mother when she heard noises coming from the bedroom. When she saw someone viciously beating her mother, she turned to run away. As a witness, she became collateral damage. According to the autopsy, the murders were estimated to take place between 7 and 7:15 p.m. Not a very big window. It's weird to think that they would already be in bed by that time. Maybe Amber, but Christine was known to be a night owl. Here was their nightly routine. Amber would get into her pajamas around 7 p.m. and would be in bed by 7:30 or 8. But she didn't go right to sleep. After that, she read books to herself. She usually didn't fall asleep until around 9 p.m. Christine typically stayed up completing chores and then cuddled up with a good book, all of which she needed her prescription glasses to do. She was basically blind without them. The earliest she ever went to sleep was 11 p.m. Not only was she found naked, but her prescription glasses were folded up on her nightstand like she always did before going to bed. But Christine's mother testified, stating that there was 0% chance that both Amber and Christine were in bed at 7 p.m. If Mark was guilty, here's the tricky part. His hotel was about 142 kilometers, or 88 miles, to his home in Palmerston North. The reports I read said it would normally be about a 2-hour drive, but Google Maps now says 1 hour 47 minutes. I'm sure that's give or take with traffic. That means Mark hung up the phone with them at 5:43 p.m., jumped in his car and floored it to their home in Palmerston North, killed them, then flew back to the hotel and called his business partner at 8:20. For those doing the math, the time from 5:43 to 8:20 is 2 hours and 37 minutes. When generating estimated times for car routes, Google Maps assumes that the driver will be traveling at or near the posted speed limits for the roads along the route. But how fast would Mark have to be going to make that round trip? Well, an average of 160 kilometers per hour, or 100 miles per hour, on the highway. Extremely fast, but possible. Police attempted to reenact this drive. While the officer was not able to do it in the time that they believed Mark did it, he stated he thinks he could have. It was more of a concern for the safety of the public and cars around him. Not to mention, between 5:30 and 8:20, Mark will be traveling during rush hour traffic, meaning there would be a lot of witnesses to Mark's erratic driving, yet nothing was reported. Here is some evidence found that supports Mark could be the killer. A silver bracelet was found on the passenger seat of Mark's car. His explanation was that he and Christine went on a recent trip together, and she haphazardly grabbed a handful of jewelry, stuffed it into her purse, and it must have fallen out of her purse during the commute. But if you remember, Christine's wooden jewelry box was missing from their bedroom. It seemed more likely to police that Mark took the jewelry box to stage a robbery, and the bracelet fell out of the jewelry box while in his car. On the other side of this, none of Christine's family or friends recognized that bracelet. Maybe it belonged to another woman, a sex worker that Mark had hired in the past. Flecks of paint were found in the wounds and hair of both Christine and Amber. Mark's previous job involved the use of tools, and he used paint to label his set of tools, making it easier to identify them on the job site. He kept his tools locked in a shed, and he was the only one who had a key. When the shed was searched, there was no tomahawk present, but one later appeared, and it was the one tool that was not marked with paint. It seemed to be planted there after the fact. Perhaps the most damning piece of evidence was a polo shirt found in the trunk of Mark's car. On the shirt were 2 visible stains. They were small stains. I mean, if you picture what the killer was doing, they would more than likely be covered in blood. The master bedroom was, and there's no way the person wielding the weapon would make it out without any blood on them. Mark admitted to wearing this exact polo on that night, but police believe he wore plastic coveralls to protect himself from any blood spatter. Both Christine and Amber's DNA was found within these small stains. And this isn't out of the ordinary. He does live with them. What is suspicious is the type of DNA. There was dried blood belonging to Amber. Christine's DNA, after some serious new scientific testing, which I will go more into detail later, was identified as cells from her central nervous system, more specifically, Christine's brain tissue. You may be able to argue away dried blood from a child. Boo-boos happen all the time, but there is absolutely no reason anyone's brain matter should be on your shirt. Unless, of course, you beat her head in with a tomahawk and accidentally smeared it on your shirt when removing your plastic coveralls. Margaret, a woman who lived in the same neighborhood as the Lundys, came forward with a report she witnessed a jogger around 7:15 p.m. as she was pulling out of her driveway. Margaret reported this jogger as a man wearing a business suit with leather shoes and then layered a tracksuit over top. She said the man had a distressed look on his face. I mean, so would I while jogging. But the strangest part of all, this man was wearing a long blonde wig, and it was falling off as he ran, or jogged, to his car that was parked near Margaret's house. A car that matched the description of Mark's. A car that matched the description of Mark's. The time Margaret saw this jogger lined up with the time frame Christine and Amber were murdered. I feel like literally no one is choosing to go jogging in a tracksuit layered over a business suit, wearing leather shoes and a wig. So this is definitely suspicious. Police agreed and had come to the conclusion that Mark killed Christine and Amber. Here is what they believe happened on August 29th, 2000. At 5:30 p.m., Christine and Amber called Mark on his cell phone. He was in his hotel room in Petone. And I'm not exactly sure where this came from, but they think that Mark then suggested Christine should put Amber to bed early that night because he was planning to drive home so the two could have sex. And I guess she just agreed, put Amber to bed, got naked, and waited patiently for his return. No matter how much I love my spouse, I am not driving 2 hours each way for a quick one. Mark left either during the 5:30 p.m. phone call or directly after and hightailed it to Palmerston North. He parked in front of Margaret's house to avoid being seen. He went into his shed, grabbed the tomahawk, and put on a plastic coverall suit. Mark murdered Christine and Amber sometime between 7 and 7:15 p.m. He altered the settings on a computer to make it look like it was shut off at 10:52, took the jewelry box, and broke the latch on the window to stage a robbery. He peeled off his bloody coveralls and put on a tracksuit, a blonde wig, and casually jogged back to his car. From there, he drove like a bat out of hell to his hotel in Petone and made that call to his business partner in an attempt to create an alibi. Then, he called up the massage parlor for a little nookie nightcap, and police felt like this was solid enough theory to arrest Mark Lundy for the murder of his wife and daughter. His trial was set for February 2001. There were 130 witnesses interrogated, including Mark's brother Craig, who stated he believed Mark was guilty. Margaret was the key witness for the prosecution team, but many questioned her reliability. She was a self-proclaimed psychic, and also states she had a, quote, photographic memory. She was the only one who saw the jogger, even though others said they were outside at that time. Mark claims he was in his car reading a book near his hotel during the time of the murders, after which he went back to his room, spoke to his business partner, drank some liquor, and ordered a sex worker. Mark said he definitely did not propose sex to Christine that night. She was most likely found naked because that is how she slept. Neighbors stated the lights were off in the sunroom at 9:45, but on at 11. The next day, when Christine's brother came and found her and Amber, the lights were off. Remember, the computer was shut down around 10:52, but Christine and Amber were killed between 7 and 7:15, so did the killer hang around for hours afterwards? If so, it wasn't Mark, because he made that phone call to his business partner from his hotel at 8:20 p.m. I personally find it a little weird he made that call from the landline at the hotel when he had a cell phone. Maybe it was dead, maybe it was out of data, who knows? It was the year 2000. Cell phones weren't quite used like they are today, but that is how he spoke to Christine and Amber at 5:30 and what he used to call the sex worker later that evening. What I wasn't able to find out was the information from his cellular company. Was it only time-stamped phone calls, or were they able to GPS track where the call came from? If there was GPS tracking, that would make it all too easy to pinpoint where Mark was at the time of the murders. But if there wasn't tracking, Who's to say he was actually in Petone when he talked to Christine and Amber? What if he was already back to his hometown, gearing up to commit murder? Now, let's review the contradicting evidence to Mark being guilty. The Lundy family computer was turned off at 10:52 p.m. If Mark was the killer, who turned off the computer? Was it possible to schedule a time for the computer to shut down at a later time to stage the scene? Well, investigators were able to see the computer history and noted that someone had manipulated the time settings on multiple occasions prior to the murders. They believe that Mark did practice runs shutting the computer down at a certain time but making it look like it was shut down at a later time to throw off the investigation. Let's touch back on the motive. Remember how just days before the murders, Christine's life insurance was increased? Funny thing is, this wasn't Mark's idea. It was suggested by the insurance broker, and Mark's was also upgraded. And at the time of the murders, the paperwork hadn't even been filed yet. How about the crazy fast round trip Mark made from Petone to Palmerston North, averaging 100 miles per hour on the highway? As I mentioned earlier, this drive was attempted by a few people, including a police officer working the case, but no one was able to do it in the time allotted. No one except maybe Mark himself. On August 30th, when he got the call that police were parked outside of his home, Mark made that same drive just about as fast as he would have the night before if he committed the murders. While it might be possible, it is wild to think that there were no witnesses to his erratic driving, no calls to police, no highway patrollers, no speed cams. There are theories Mark called a sex worker to help create an alibi, but if he was trying to make himself look like a loving husband and father, I'm sure there's many other ways he could have went about creating an alibi. How about a time-stamped receipt for an ice cream cone or a movie ticket? Let's go all the way back to the crime scene. Normally, there are multiple tests performed by a medical examiner to determine a time of death. In this particular case, the medical examiner didn't want to disrupt the crime scene and did a very basic visual exam. Bro, that's your job. You are not disturbing anything. Normally, the examiner will check body temperature, check for rigor mortis and lividity. The time of death was determined only by the contents of their stomach during the autopsy. None of the McDonald's food had entered the intestines, and there was, quote, lack of gastric smells, which normally comes with digestion. Given this information, the medical examiner decided if they ate around 6 p.m., they must have been murdered in the window of 7 to 7:15 p.m. The problem here is that everyone digests food at different rates. For example, age, gender, and the type of food you consume, your exercise routine, disorders like IBS, diabetes, and thyroid issues. If looking purely at the stomach contents, the window should be more like 6 hours, not 15 minutes. Having said that, I don't think this discovery is necessarily in Mark's favor. If the window is 6 hours, maybe Mark called the sex worker, they did their thing, then he drove to the house and murdered his wife and daughter. She was naked because she was actually sleeping, not a likely scenario at 7 p.m. I didn't mention this earlier, but his cell phone was turned off after the sex worker called a cab. Just a bit suspicious. Maybe he turned off the computer, he messed with the lights, and then drove back to his hotel in a normal amount of time, unrushed. Every time I think I know what happened, my theory is squashed. But if he killed them later in the night, who was the man in the business suit / tracksuit wearing a blonde wig? Or maybe Margaret's photographic memory isn't actually all that great. It is said her memories became more clear once photos of Mark were all over the news. Personally, what I cannot get past is the brain tissue cells on Mark's shirt. The defense team argued this could have been planted evidence. But if that is true, why wouldn't they put more than just a smudge on the shirt? This type of testing had never even been done before. If a person were going to plant evidence, I think they would make it way more obvious. While we are on the topic, let's dive deeper into this new testing that was used in this case. It's called immunohistochemistry, or IHC. I have read article after article describing this, and I'll be honest, it's still way over my head. But for those more scientifically advanced, according to thermofisher.com, IHC makes it possible to visualize and document the high-resolution distribution and localization of specific cellular components within cells and within their proper histological context. At the time, this was brand spanking new to forensic science world, and what was the test subject prior to this case? Why, a whole chicken being prepped for Sunday dinner. The forensic scientist accidentally had the chicken neck rub on his shirt and thought, let's test this out. So I honestly don't know how much this holds up. Many scientists came forward stating to claim the cells were 100% Christine's brain tissue would be hard to prove. Apparently, it was not even certain to determine if the cells were human or animal. But why would cells from a central nervous system of an animal be on a shirt? They say maybe from cooking something like sausage. I mean, there is a little bit of everything in there, but let's be real. What's the likelihood of it being specifically brain tissue cells from the sausage without any other type of cells present? And he was wearing that shirt on the night his wife and daughter were beaten/stabbed repeatedly in the head. 7 out of 12 markers indicated the cells were more likely to be human than animal. If Mark did commit the murders and was able to get rid of all the other physical evidence, like coveralls, the murder weapon, etc., why would he keep the shirt he was wearing? And my only thought is that he believed the coveralls would do their job and keep him protected from any physical evidence. I know we are mainly talking about Mark, but there were nearly 60 suspects in this case, most of which were ruled out because they had alibis during the 7 p.m. time frame. But now we have reason to believe it didn't necessarily happen at 7 p.m. There is potentially a 6-hour window, so were the other suspects ever looked back into? Negative. Christine's brother, Glenn, was a potential suspect in the beginning. The day he discovered the bodies and called police, he had a fresh cut on his nose. When they searched his car and house, police found blood with an 83% match to Christine and an 88% match to Amber in his trunk, on a handkerchief, and his underwear. What the f***? Apparently, Glenn had an inappropriate relationship with Amber. And that's putting it nicely. Let's call it like it is. He was molesting her. Even with this blood evidence, Glenn was never charged with the crimes. Remember the phone call Mark had with his business partner? Well, apparently it was regarding 2 big guys who came to settle a debt demanding $16,000. The business partner told them he didn't have it, so they stole root cuttings that were going to be used in the vineyard, and these are apparently very expensive. Police were called, but they decided just to stay out of it and let them handle their own business, even though threats were made and items were stolen. Interesting. The business partner ended up writing a check to the men, and during that phone call to Mark, updated him on the situation. What if these scary men went to Mark's house? They busted in the master bedroom, expecting Mark, but it was Christine. Then Amber comes in to see what's going on, and it all just ended horribly. There were foreign hairs found on Christine's hands that were never tested. Surely they belonged to the killer. Why weren't they tested? And sadly, we can't test them now because they were destroyed. There was unknown male DNA found under both Christine and Amber's fingernails. That DNA was not a match for Mark or Glenn. So whose was it? Even with all this contradicting evidence, the jury focused on that polo shirt. It was the smoking gun. Mark was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. In 2002, Mark's defense team appealed his conviction, but had an unexpected result. It did not end in his favor. In fact, the non-parole period was extended from 17 to 20 years. This case carried so much controversy that Mark was granted a second trial in 2015. Multiple forensic scientists took the stand and tore apart the testing that was done on the stains from Mark's polo shirt, stating it was flawed science and inaccurate. Now, this was the smoking gun in the original trial, and now that was completely taken off the table, deemed inadmissible. But it was already talked about. The jury obtained the information whether it was admissible or not. Mark Lundy was once again found guilty. Appeals continue to be filed, but nothing has ever come of them. He is currently serving out his life sentence in Tongariro Prison in the central North Island of New Zealand. You guys, I honestly have no idea what happened in this case. In the beginning, I was like, oh, for sure, Mark is guilty. But now I'm leaning towards the big scary guys who threatened Mark's business partner. That happened the same day of the murders. This would explain the foreign hairs and unknown male DNA under their fingernails. But then, what about the blood found on Glenn's belongings? I would love to hear his explanation. I want to know what you think of this one. If you are listening on YouTube, drop your comments below. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Killer Stories Podcast. You can email me your thoughts and any news story suggestions to killerstoriespodcast@gmail.com. Time to read a review and shout out one of my listeners. This 5-star review was left on Apple Podcasts by Moscow Missy. Finally, a podcast where the host can speak English with proper grammar. Great storyteller, nice episode length, not 20 minutes of banter at the beginning, and respectful language. So glad I found this podcast. Can I just tell you how happy it makes me that you noted my proper grammar? I'm like the grammar police. I cringe when I read social media posts and I want to comment correcting people, and it's so hard to hold back. Thanks so much for your kind words, Missy. It may not be in 2 weeks, but I do promise to be back with another episode as soon as I'm able. Until next time, this has been a killer story.